Promise to show you one more thing, and this isn't something we'll use in this class, but you should be aware of it. Some of this stuff is covered more thoroughly in our typography courses. Here's my friend Woody again. This is a demonstration of an ad layout. This would be called an Ogilvy layout number 1. David Ogilvy, the head of Ogilvy and Mather in New York. For years, all of his ads were the same format. A picture at the top, a headline, and text below, because the important thing was the text. The picture is just to draw you in. After a decade or two of doing that, someone asked for a different layout, so we came up with David Ogilvy layout number 2, which is the picture on the left and the copy on the right. Anyway, image, I've got some text, I've got a headline, I've got some placeholder text. This is an ad for the ZYX Corporation, of course. Let me show you what I did down here. Notice to get this spread out this way, I don't use spaces to position things. Like right here, I didn't go space, 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 space. I can actually do this with one space, because what I'm doing is force justifying the entire line. Justify all lines, or here in the paragraph palette, justify all lines. This is last line left. It's only one line, so it's the last line. Force all lines. You get that. And the reason these stay together is because I have inserted fixed spaces in between the parts that I want to stay together. If I didn't do that, I'd get this. If I go to the type pull down and find insert white space, fixed with non-breaking space, and put those every place that I don't want the words to come apart, and then I can force justify and it will space those out. Let me go into preview for that. But I thought those were kind of big spaces, so in between I put a flexible space and then a bullet, which on the PC would be Alt 0149 for the big one, or Alt 01. That's an M width bullet, Alt 0183 for the small bullet. I need these, the space and the bullet, to be the same size as this type so it comes out even. Otherwise, this space is a 25 point space, whereas this is 14 point. Over here, I can just use space Alt 183, or you can go to the glyph palette and find that bullet. There it is. And now that it's the last thing I used in the glyph palette, you can go over here and double click on that, space, double click on that, space. I wanted to show you text wrap. As you can see, the text runs around this photo. That's wrap. Text wrap is something you apply to the object that you want the text to wrap around. It's not something you apply to the text. If I want this about here, so I'm going to line that up with the X height at the top. There's the text wrap palette. And I've set this for 0 wrap at the top, -6 at the bottom. If I do 0 at the bottom, it makes a bigger hole down there. So I went -6, minus P6 or -6 points. You can type in numbers, you could use the clickers. Do that too far. And then the type's actually behind the image there. Minus P6. And then left and right, it's 1 pica, which is fine. That's a reasonable space. There's some other forms of text wrap. I've got this little picture of another wooden soldier, and I could wrap around the object shape. This is set for wrapping to the alpha channel. The alpha channel is the mask channel in the Photoshop file. I could detect edges and it will do much the same thing, where in some cases it can find the edge of an object and will create a wrap line to that. And if you don't like the way it's wrapping, you can say I only want it to wrap on the right side. And if you're worried about words popping into little holes, like say, let's say if I reduce the size of this and I start getting type wrapping into holes there where it will affect the readability of the type, I could use my direct select tool and edit the anchor points. I can actually use my minus anchor point tool and just start getting rid of some of these anchor points. You can edit the text wrap. I've got another one here. Look, it's peppers. Everybody loves peppers, right? And again, I can make this wrap, say, only on the right side. And this one is set to detect edges, where There is no clipping path. There is no alpha channel. It's just a JPEG. A JPEG won't have a clipping path. And I have this set in my layer at the bottom, so it's behind the text. If I put it in front of the text, and turn off the wrap, turn on the wrap, the background of the image, because it doesn't have a clipping mask, is covering that up. So that's why I put it to the back. And actually detect edges there. Okay, so it's in front here. So put it to the back, and now it wraps to that. That's how text wrap works. I have one other thing here that you probably want to know about, and that is that if I want to put text in front of an image that has a text wrap, the type disappears. I can verify for you that this is at the top in the layer order, the top object in that layer, but my type's disappeared. There it is there, but it's not here. What do? Command B, text frame options. Aside from setting up column widths and insets and vertical justification and baseline settings and column rules and a bunch of other stuff that we won't be using in this class, I can tell it to ignore text wrap. Here's some examples of spanning and splitting columns. This is 3 columns. And if you look at the top, it says it's 3 columns. Command B, text frame options, it's 3 columns. Each column is 14 picas and 4.333 points wide. That's something you can't do on a Linotype machine or with handset type. Well, handset type you probably could, but you'd be hand filing things. And I'm going to have to move this over so that you can see this side of my control panel. 3 columns and nothing happening there, but right here you'll notice that I made this span all 3. None, span 3. This down here, this is span 2. This is all not spanning at all. This is some call out text that I put in there with a text wrap. Just get that down somewhere where it looks about centered. This block of text here, my text wrap, Command Option J, or you will find this in the paragraph control panel in the options paragraph rules. I don't know if you can see that, it's over on the edge. And on my paragraph palette, options paragraph rules. Or if I have a paragraph style, and I can create a paragraph style for this, let's say new style, and call this call out. And in that paragraph style, if I double click on this, I can edit it. Paragraph rules. I have a 2-point paragraph rule above. I can select the color for it. If I had a stroke that had a space in the middle, let's try that one. Make that a little bit bigger, and I'm going to say this will be black, but I want the gap color to be red, maybe blue. I can do that. And then the rule below is 2 points in black. Yep, there it is. Let's say 3 points. Let's say 4 points in black. And there's an offset because I want to position it. I want to position it where I want it. And the same with the rule above. This has an offset. It starts out at the baseline, and then I have to offset it however far I want it to move above the baseline. So that's paragraph rules. I kind of like that red and black though, so I'm going to Command Z, go back to what I had before. Down here I have a paragraph that I've turned into a subhead by spanning 2. And this part's a little tricky. If I turn this off, I actually have to put this over here to get it to fall where I want it in the span 2. If I put it in this column and do span 2, it actually goes over to the first column. Getting the spans to work in asymmetrical ways is kind of tricky, but it can be done. I wanted to talk about paragraph underscores briefly. I'm going to add some space after to this. For this paragraph, add a paragraph rule, Command Option J, or Control Alt J on the PC, and say rule below. Make that a 2-point rule and give it some offset. And I can make it as wide as the text frame or the column, or I can make it as wide as the text. But what if I only want to underline subhead? I have character underscore. Now, you've got that style option of underscoring something, but you're stuck with that position. If you don't like that position, you don't want to use that. So on the character palette, in options, I've got underline options. And this is the default. You're looking at the default right there. Preview. Turn that off. That's the default. It's a percentage of the type size, and the offset is a percentage of the type size. Well, what if I want it to be 3-point thick and I want it to be offset more? I could do that, and I could change the color. I could have that be red. That's underline options. That's why I say we don't generally just push that underline button at the top. We might want to do something where, for example, the default, undo this back to here, subheading, and then give this an underscore. And if you're doing that on something like a headline, actually most of the time, unless you just don't care how type looks, which is what you usually get from people who are accustomed to working with a typewriter instead of typography, I think it's unsightly to have that going through the descender. So that's the case where I would character palette options, underline options, give that more offset so that I'm not running through there, because it just looks terrible. One more thing, as long as it's right here, someone who understands typography would know that if you have dimensions like 6 by 9 inches, the correct glyph in there is a multiplication sign because it's 6 by 9, not a lowercase x, which looks wrong. These are inch marks. The default setup, edit, preferences, type, use typographer's quotes. If I turn that off and hit the inch sign on the keyboard, I get that. But if I, let's see, edit, I think preferences actually in a different pull down on the Mac, I forget. Type, turn on use typographer's quotes. Then I get a quote mark when I use that key on the keyboard. However, if I type it out like this, and I want to correct that, I could select this and Alt-Shift quote mark, or on the Mac, Option-Shift quote mark to get the inch marks. And actually, if you have typographer's quotes turned off, it works exactly opposite. You would get this when you hit the key on the keyboard, and if you typed Option-Shift quote marks, you would get the typographer's quotes. And the other way you could do it is, when you can't remember those shortcuts, is you go to the glyph palette and find punctuation. There's the inch sign. If I needed the quote marks, it'd be there. If I need a correct multiplication sign, it's there. Another thing about spacing, this now looks asymmetrical, where you have this large counter underneath the inch mark or the double prime and no space here. So to balance that, I would usually put in insert white space. I would try a hair space, possibly a little more. Let's try type, insert white space, thin space. Yes, visually to me that looks about right, and that's one Command Option Shift M. There's a keyboard shortcut for that, but if you can't remember a shortcut for something that is a special character, hyphens, dashes, quotation marks, other, any of the insert white space, the four that have shortcuts, I can generally remember the shortcuts. If I need a hair space or a quarter space or a third space, then I go to the pull down. That's all I had to show you about paragraph setup and glyphs in InDesign.